When it comes to AI, striking the balance between privacy and civil liberties and supporting innovation and needed change is difficult. My next guest is Republican Senator Eric Lucero, who is navigating the space around progress and protections with his bill, Senate File 1242, also known as the Facial Recognition Technology Warrant Act of 2025. Senator, thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me back. It's always an honor to have conversations relating to aspects of life that are impacting Minnesotans, such as artificial intelligence.
And in honor of your return, I have my Senator Lucero jacket ready to go. So let us begin. Let's start with something basic, Senator. How would you describe AI for those who are a little more unfamiliar with the term?
Absolutely. So artificial intelligence is what AI stands for. And artificial intelligence is a series of algorithms seeking to mimic human thinking, human reasoning, dynamically adapting to situations and trying to problem solve. And a key word is mimic, because it's not a replacement for human thinking, but trying to come as close as possible to mimicking human behavior and reasoning and thinking.
Right. It's making me think Terminator, Skynet. We're not there yet, but it's attempting.
Yes.
So along those lines, you introduced Senate File 1242, which is also known as the Facial Recognition Technology Warrant Act of 2025. Talk me through that. What inspired you to create it, and what is it hoping to accomplish?
So as a technologist myself, that's what I've been doing for over 20 years now, is in the space of cybersecurity, but technology more broadly. One of the things that I've been trying to have conversations my entire time in the legislature is the application of technology, whether it be in the private sector or the public sector, and how those are having implications and what kind of controls the government needs to put in place to protect citizens, to protect privacy, to protect rights and civil liberties. And so when it comes to that bill specifically, that is just one aspect of applying technology. So facial recognition technology uses artificial intelligence in the application then of biometrically measuring a person's facial features and then doing something with that information. Now, the bill that you referenced, it's seeking to create a framework and put controls in place in regards to law enforcement or government using facial recognition technology for different aspects of surveillance. And so one of the things that I've seen over and over again in my time in the legislature is technology innovates, it gets used by various aspects of government, and then we in the legislature may not find out about it until several years after it's been in use. So whether, let's say, police body cams, or there are other aspects that it's really difficult to try to rein something in and put controls or limits in place, checks and balances, after it's been used. Automatic license plate readers is another example in my time. So this is my attempt, even though facial recognition technology is obviously out there, the bill is an attempt to put those controls in place to protect civil liberties and to have those checks and balances.
Now, you mentioned it's hard to rein it in once it's already been put in place. Do we know if that technology is already being used here in Minnesota? Or, what about private sector and government? How else are we using AI right now?
No, that's an excellent question. So one example in the private sector would be just this past summer, so summer of 2024, the Mall of America, right in our own backyard here in Minnesota, they announced the use of facial recognition technology at the mall. And so bipartisanly, myself and Senator Fateh, we issued a release expressing our concerns. And so that is an example of, is there expressed consent? Here are some of the rhetorical questions. Is there expressed consent given by those whose information is being collected? How is the information being stored? Is it being stored? What's the retention? How is it being deleted? Is it being shared with anybody? Is it being data mined? Is it being used in other purposes that are beyond, again, somebody at the mall themselves? And so this example of the private sector harvesting biometric information without affirmative consent is red flags for those who are seeking to uphold data privacy and affirmative consent when it comes to data.
Now, you mentioned some of those red flags when it comes to that, but some people would argue that this type of technology can do more good than harm. So it's ultimately a good tool. How do you respond to that kind of comment?
Well, for all of human history, there is methods of doing things, and the things can be a placeholder. But all of human history, there's processes and there's technology that's constantly being innovated. So let me just go back a couple hundred years. There was scribes before the printing press. People would scribe or transcribe documents from one to the next. That was the photocopy. And then as technology innovates, it's used to create efficiencies. That's a really good thing because you can do it for much cheaper and mass produce certain publications. So the technology itself is agnostic to being good or bad. But with every technology, there are always ethical considerations. And so when it comes to this, you're spot on. The proponents of facial recognition technology are correct. There are good applications of it. But just like any technology, it can be used for evil purposes, and that might be a little bit of a strong word. In some cases, it would be evil, but others, it would just be unethical, or the definition of good versus bad is relative. Because I personally, one who stands for individual privacy, I don't want my facial features captured without affirmative consent. That to me is unethical. Somebody else with a different standard would say that's perfectly fine. And that's the continuum we're on. It's this struggle between privacy versus security, liberty versus security. And so they are correct, and that's the dialogue we need to have is on this continuum, where do we slide it? Where's the correct spot in Minnesota to balance individual liberty, civil rights versus government and or security?
I think there's a famous quote about that, freedom versus security. Going back to your bill, Senate File 1242, it has bipartisan support, and that usually, is a good sign for getting it passed. What are your thoughts on its chances this session?
I don't know necessarily about this session, but like many bills, when they're introduced, it may take several sessions in order to communicate, to get dialogue around them, to get awareness, and to build momentum. So whether it be that bill, there are other bills as well that I'm similarly working and have strong bipartisan support. Another one is a proposed constitutional amendment that would add digital data to have the same protections that persons, houses, papers, and effects does in the Fourth Amendment. So it would require, if the government is going to handle digital data, personal data, they have to do so with the same protections as they would for papers, houses, persons, and effects. Another example, bipartisan bill, is a neural rights bill. Now think about this. As technology continues to innovate, the interface, where most people are familiar with the human-computer interface right now, it's a keyboard and a mouse and a screen, and then a printer are some of the ways we input data, and then we get data out. But we've seen, whether it be Elon Musk or Google or others, are looking to create new human-computer interfaces, such as direct brain connections, a neural link, for example. And that technology, it's only a matter of time. So here's the next natural question. When the technology eventually exists where our brain waves or brain thoughts can be captured and translated into digital forms, can that interface be used for unethical or unlawful purposes? When we think about one's mind or thoughts, can a person's thoughts be read without express consent? Will that be an illegal action? Or how about this one? Again, I know this sounds sci-fi, but here's another example of using artificial intelligence or more technology broadly. The movie Inception, where they went into the dream and they planted a thought into somebody's head in a very invasive manner. So when Elon Musk or Google or others that are working to have these human-computer interfaces, can they implant a thought into the head, or can they implant or put brainwaves, and maybe one's thoughts now are not their own? Again, I know this sounds way sci-fi and way out there, but it's only a matter of time, and I think it's much closer than we might think. And so one of the bills that I have has strong bipartisan support as well, is to ensure that it is a crime to extract somebody's thoughts and or to implant thoughts without their permission. And so, again, there's more bills, but those are just a handful of examples.
Well, you mentioned sci-fi. I love sci-fi, and as you said, the time is you're supposed to get ahead of it before it comes, to put those guardrails in place. So
Exactly.
Technology might not be here, but it's good to have the conversation. So we've talked about some of the drawbacks of AI, some of the benefits of AI. Ultimately, do you think it will be a net positive, a net negative at the moment for Minnesota, or is it just impossible to categorize?
It is absolutely going to be a very positive thing, but there are very serious and real dangers and risks. And that's why we need to put these protections in place. So when we think about customizing at a very, very basic level, I'm a coffee drinker, and so if I can have my coffee individualized to me with a certain level of creamer, or a certain level of sweetener, or a certain level of whatever added to it, that's a customize. But now let's take it to the next level. When we think about treatments or prescriptions for certain ailments in the healthcare space, right, there's general, whether it be 5 milligrams, 25 milligrams, 50 milligrams of XYZ pharmaceutical, that is more general. What if, as artificial intelligence can analyze data and come up with a more individualized approach that will be more successful and or more efficient? So there's a cost savings aspect, there's a potential more effectiveness in the healthcare outcome. And so those are examples of very, very positive to our society. So again, whether it be healthcare, whether it be all the applications in our life of using the ability to crunch massive amounts of data to be very specific to the individual and to increase efficiencies, whether it be the private sector or the government. But then again, we come back to that threat to privacy and civil liberty. And when government is using artificial intelligence, whether it be in the law enforcement capacity or whether it be in anything that government does, there are opportunities for discrimination, infringes on civil liberties, because when it comes to these algorithms, somebody has to write them. An algorithm is simply a code. It's a code that's designed to be mimicking the decision making, as I explained earlier. And so somebody's bias, their lived experience, is going to be baked into that code. And so when we have government using that, what potential biases exist when the machine is mimicking the reasoning ability or adapting to certain situations that might be unethical? And then you add in, let's say, the religious aspect to this. When it comes to different decisions that have to be made, how will they potentially infringe on religious liberty? Right? I mean, there's so many aspects to this. It's tough to have a conversation, obviously, in a handful of minutes, but these are very serious conversations as we go forward in the decisions and controls we absolutely need to put in place.
Well, I absolutely appreciate the conversation. Thank you for your time today, Senator.
Thank you so much.